Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Maggie McIntosh, we'd like to welcome everyone today to the virtual briefing by the Office of Legislative Audits. This afternoon, we will hear audits from 4 different agencies. That is the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the Maryland Department of Transportation Motor Vehicles Administration, the Maryland Department of Health, the Pharmacy Services, and also the Maryland Department of Health Medicaid Error Rate Performance Audit. In the past, we have asked the Office of Legislative Audits to present these audits at the agency budget hearing so that the subcommittees could keep the findings in mind when making budget decisions. Because we've changed to joint budget hearings this session, we've asked Office of Legislative Audits to present these audits of concern to the full committee instead. The work of Office of Legislative Audits and the Joint Audit Committee, chaired by our own Delegate Carol Krim, is very important. We ask that everyone please listen carefully to the findings of the auditors and responses from the agencies and use today to inform our work this legislative session. Thank you everyone for being here, and as a reminder to all the members of the Appropriations Committee to please have all our cameras on and also to have an appropriate background in our Zoom boxes. Also, please use the raise hand function on our Zoom program here. What we will do is we will hear from each of the different audit managers first, and also their staff. And at that time, after their auditors are presented the findings, then we'll take questions from members of the Appropriations Committee, and then we'll hear from the agencies, and then we'll take questions from members of the committee to the agencies. And we'll also do is I'll introduce the audit managers of each agency, and if the audit managers could please introduce their staff who is on the Zoom today. First, we will hear from the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, Adam Westover, CPA Audit Manager. Good afternoon, Mr. Westover, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and committee members, for the opportunity to address the committee about our recent fiscal compliance audit of the State Department of Assessment and Taxation. I was the audit manager for the fiscal compliance portion of the audit. With me virtually is Joe McWilliams. Joe is a senior auditor who manages our fraud investigation unit. Joe worked on findings 5 and 8 in the report. These findings resulted from tips to OLA's Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Hotline. Joe will discuss finding 5 in detail later, as these findings were developed by the Fraud Investigation Unit. The 2 other seniors who worked on the audit, Nathan Suffin and Mark Katz, are also with me. Is there a PowerPoint presentation up?
You now have the ability to share your screen.
Oh, I thought someone would be doing the PowerPoint like on the Joint Audit Committee. I'll just read through my comments. My presentation was provided to you. So, as indicated on slide 2 of the report, the report had 9 findings, of which there are 3 repeat findings from our previous audit report. It should be noted that this was an improvement from the previous audit report that had 5 repeat findings. DAT is responsible for a number of functions such as real property and personal property assessments and providing tax credits to homeowners and renters. The key findings in the report are on slide 3 of my presentation. I will be discussing these findings in more detail. The first finding of the report is related to real property assessments and is discussed on page 4. Real property is assessed once every 3 years by assessors in the 24 local assessment offices under DAT's direction and oversight. During the 2018 legislative session, a bill was passed that eliminated the requirement for DAT to physically inspect all properties to determine assessed value. There are still situations in which a physical inspection is still required, such as establishing the initial value of a property or existing properties with improvements expected to add at least $100,000 to the value of the property. Because the law change removed the requirement for all properties to be inspected, we focused on the procedures for those properties that are still required to have an inspection. Our audit found that DAT did not have procedures to ensure the 24 local assessment offices properly coded building permits in DAT's automated system. Although DAT area supervisors monitored local supervisors to ensure permits were reviewed, they did not ensure the reviews were comprehensive. We noted residential and commercial building permits totaling 338 million were not properly coded. Based on the values of these permits, they should have been coded as new construction to ensure they were subject to required inspections and have assessed values updated if needed. There was no reason recorded as to why these were not coded as new construction in DAT's automated system. DAT was not aware that 2 local offices did not obtain or record construction project costs in DAT's automated system. This is important to ensure properties need inspection are inspected. These 2 offices accounted for approximately 13% of the total statewide assessable tax base for the tax year beginning July 1st, 2019. DAT did not always conduct periodic inspections of construction projects that were ongoing for extended periods to determine if they were complete and then a need for assessment. For example, one permit issued in October 2017 had no inspections as of July 2019, even though our research noted the project appears substantially complete in August 2018. Finding 2 of the report is discussed on page 5 of the handout. The second finding relates to real property assessment appeals. A homeowner can appeal their real property assessment first to their local assessment office. If they're not happy with the results, they can appeal to Maryland Property Tax Appeals Board. And finally, they can appeal a decision to the Maryland Tax Court. We noted DAT did not use available output reports to ensure all appeals recorded in this automated system were subject to an independent review and approval. DAT relied on assessors to advise them when an appeal was recorded instead of an output report. During fiscal year 2018, 31,000 accounts had an appeal recorded in DAT's automated system. Finding 3 of the report related to the personal property is on page 6 of the presentation. This is a repeat finding from our previous audit. DAT certifies the value of business-owned personal property based on the personal property returns filed by specific entities as required by state law. These returns are due by April 15th, and there's generally a $300 filing fee. DAT certifies the values to the 24 local subdivisions, whom these values determine the personal property taxes owed. DAT did not review comptroller records of entities receiving payments from the state and or having an active sales tax account to identify non-registered entities that were conducting business in the state. DAT did not investigate returns with significant fluctuations or variances in reported property from previous years to identify discrepancies. DAT runs reports to identify higher risk returns to review. We reviewed 17 returns noted as high risk and noted supervisory reviews were not done for 6 of these. DAT did not have a comprehensive process to ensure the propriety of exemptions from personal property assessments and filing fees. There can be exemptions from paying personal property taxes as stated in state law, for example, property related to charitable or educational purposes. These are approved by DAT. There are also exemptions from fees based on the business entity type, such as sole proprietorship or non-stock corporations. We noted reviews of existing exemptions from personal property taxes were done from a log of initial exemption applications and not a system output report. In addition, DAT did not review supporting documentation such as proof of nonprofit status to verify the propriety of business codes assigned to entities. These codes determine if filing fees are required. Finally, for finding 3, we noted DAT did not pursue penalties provided by state regulations for untimely submission of personal property returns. As of May 2019, approximately 2,400 returns with late filing penalties delinquent for 3 to 17 months and totaling approximately 185,000 had not been referred to the state central collection unit. Finding 4 of the report is on page 7 of the presentation. This relates to the homeowner's tax credit. This was a repeat finding from our previous audit report. Homeowners' tax credits are awarded to homeowners with a combined income up to $60,000. A credit is issued against a homeowner's tax bill when the property tax exceeds a fixed percentage of the household's gross income. DAT processes applications, determines the amount of the credit, and notifies local jurisdictions, which issue the credits on tax bills or refunds. DAT did not perform timely audits of homeowners' tax credit applications. DAT did not conduct random audits of applications since 2009. DAT runs reports to identify discrepancies and fluctuations in applicant reported income. One report identifies discrepancies between income on the application and the state income tax return. Another report shows significant fluctuation in applicant income from the previous year. DAT had not audited application discrepancies between the application and the application tax return since 2014. These audits are important because awarded tax credits are not subject to independent review and approval at the time of processing. DAT is also no longer reviewing reports of redeemed homeowners tax credits prepared by local jurisdictions to ensure they were proper due to resource limitations beginning March 2019. Prior to this date, 9 jurisdictions did not submit some or all of the monthly reports. DAT did not ensure that local jurisdictions submit a request for reimbursement for redeemed tax credits to DAT as required by state law. Instead, local jurisdictions submitted reimbursement requests directly to the comptroller for payment without DAT first certifying to the comptroller that the requested reimbursement was due to jurisdiction as required by state law. DAT did not have procedures to ensure that local jurisdictions recovered and remitted tax credits when homeowners transferred their property during the year. Local jurisdictions are responsible for recovering the tax credits and forwarding them to DAT. DAT did not have a process to ensure the adequacy of local jurisdictions' collection efforts and completeness of the amounts submitted. On page 8 of the presentation, we discuss finding 5 of the report. Joe McWilliams is going to talk about that finding in more detail.
Thank you, Adam. Again, my name is Joe McWilliams, and I'll be discussing finding 5 of our audit report. This finding describes the results of our investigation into an allegation received through our fraud hotline regarding HTCs that were improperly reduced for homeowners in Montgomery County. For some background, the majority of HTCs are automatically calculated by DAT's automated system. But there are some circumstances when HTCs are calculated manually by DAT employees, such as when a homeowner has just purchased a new home and the HTC has to be prorated. Our review identified issues with both methods of calculation, resulting in improper reductions of HTCs awarded to homeowners in Montgomery County and Baltimore City totaling $4.4 million in 2019. The majority of this $4.4 million related to Montgomery County. And that's because DAT's automated system was improperly programmed to deduct a separate credit administered by Montgomery County from the homeowner's property tax liabilities. To illustrate how this works, let's say a 30-year-old homeowner had a state and county property tax liability of $2,000. Depending on other factors such as income level, this homeowner should receive an HTC up to $2,000. Unfortunately, due to the way DAT's automated system calculated the HTC, that wasn't the case. Instead of using the total state and county property tax liability in its calculation, DAT was reducing it by the amount of the other credit administered by Montgomery County. So in this example, the homeowner's $2,000 HTC would have been reduced by $692, leaving them with a credit of about $1,300. We couldn't readily determine the amount of improper HTC reductions for years prior to 2019, but we did find that DAT had improperly calculated HTCs dating back to at least 2005. We noted similar issues with the HTCs manually calculated by DAT employees for 13 homeowners in Montgomery County and Baltimore City. The HTCs for these 13 homeowners were improperly reduced by $6,500. It's important to note that DAT had received advice from its legal counsel in January 2019 that its HTC calculation methodology wasn't proper. However, DAT had not corrected the programming language in its automated system for Montgomery County, and its employees continued to manually calculate the HTCs improperly. I also want to point out that DAT's response to our audit report indicated it did not think the prior year calculations were incorrect because they were consistent with DAT's practice at the time and upheld by Maryland's Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board and Maryland tax court decisions. However, this statement is not consistent with DAT's position during our audit fieldwork and after our audit when we discussed the finding with DAT management. This statement is also questionable since our assessment that the calculation was improper was consistent with the advice from DAT's legal counsel. Finally, DAT's audit report response also stated that because it did not think the prior year calculations were incorrect, it did not plan to compensate homeowners for prior year tax credits. However, DAT has since indicated in a follow-up letter that it is working to provide a fiscal note for legislation regarding homeowners impacted during the 2017, 18, and 19 HTC application years. That concludes my comments on finding 5. I'll turn it back over to Adam for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Joe. On slide 9 is a payroll finding related to administrative leave. DAT awarded approximately $56,000 in paid administrative leave over 5 months to a senior management employee without any documentation. This was in excess of the 10 days allowed by state regulations. The employee was hired by DAT in late March 2019. The employee was placed on paid administrative leave in early May 2019. They remained on administrative leave through most of September 2019. Since this employee was hired in late March, this means that the individual was at DAT for about 6 weeks and then was on paid administrative leave for 5 months. Senior management would not provide us with an explanation during our field work and claimed executive privilege. In DAT's response to the audit report, they did not dispute the facts, but disagreed with the finding, claiming this was outside the scope and timeframe of the audit. Personnel matters are within the scope of our audits, and OLA cannot ignore known significant events which occur after our audit period ending date, but prior to report issuance, which is explained in our audit scope and objectives section. At the December 8th, 2020 JAEC hearing, DAT no longer said the item was outside the scope of the audit and agreed to provide additional information in a letter dated January 8th. DAT did that. They indicated they decided to terminate the employee in April 2019. The employee filed certain complaints with the governor's office about the management and operations at DAT. The governor's office initiated a review and the employee was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. After this review, the employee was removed from administrative leave and terminated. The remaining 3 findings are discussed on slide 10. Findings 7 and 8 were cash receipt findings. DAT did not have adequate controls to ensure collections were properly accounted for and deposited timely. DAT did not perform an independent supervisory review of corporate charter transactions to ensure the proper fees were charged. We received a referral from the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse hotline related to the collection of expedited processing fees. We noted expediting processing fees for 3,277 documents were not collected. Finding 9 was related to DAT's information system security and control. DAT procedures for logging and monitoring critical database and mainframe security events were not sufficient. This was a repeat finding from our previous audit report. On slide 11 is the conclusions. I would like to thank DAT for their cooperation during the audit. Thanks again for your time, and me, Joe, and Nate and Mark are ready for any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westover, and to your staff for the findings. Are there any questions from members of the committee to Mr. Westover and his staff? The gentlelady from Anne Arundel County is recognized, Delegate Shanika Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you for the very detailed report. I have 2 questions, if the chair will permit me. I wanted to explore the miscalculation of the HTC credits from 2017 to 2019. You mentioned there were 10 jurisdictions that were impacted by the reduction there. You mentioned Montgomery County, and I see Baltimore City in the report as well. Would you share what the remaining 8 jurisdictions are?
Joe, would you like to share that?
Sure. So our review included 10 jurisdictions. We only identified issues with Baltimore City and Montgomery County. The other 8 that we reviewed were Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, Carroll County, Cecil County, Howard County, Prince George's County, Washington County, and Worcester County.
Thank you. And then you mentioned that the findings were upheld by the court as well, in addition to being supported by the advice of legal counsel. Is there a flaw that you've identified in the policy as it's written, or something that we could do to make that more sound? How was that interpreted in such a way that it was misapplied?
I believe that DAT had misinterpreted the law as it was written, and that's why they were miscalculating the credit. They received advice from their legal counsel to explaining that they were improperly calculating the credits. However, DAT did not change their process in the calculation until after our audit had completed.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Henson, for the question. If we could just pause right here, we did want to thank Mr. Westover and the staff at State Department of Assessment Taxations for their patience with the presentation being pulled up on the screen here. We are now able to do that, and for the rest of the presentations, we'll be able to do presentations also on the screen. And thank you to Ms. Wareheim and Appropriations Committee staff for having the ability to have this available to all the members, and also everyone in the Maryland General Assembly YouTube public who is watching this. So thank you for allowing me to make that announcement. Next, the gentleman from the City of Baltimore will be recognized, the Chairman of Public Safety Administration, Delegate Keith Haynes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I have a couple of questions that I just want to ask the auditors, and just for some clarification. I'm sure we'll get into some of this a little bit more detail during the budget hearings for SDAT. But could you just repeat for me once again so that I'm clear on a statement that was made earlier that in 2019, about 13%, if I'm correct in saying this, the assessments resulted in about $333 million of properties not assessed. Can you just clarify that so I'm understanding it correctly?
We had looked at the coding of residential and commercial building permits, and we had noted that there were permits totaling 338 million that were not coded as new construction. And because they weren't coded as new construction, they wouldn't be subject to like a more timely potential inspection to get that property on the assessment records or reassess if it needed to be reassessed. That was, I believe, what related to the 338 million. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, that was 13%. And
if I may, sorry, the 13% related to two offices that were not recording the project costs in DAT's automated system.
Okay. And if I can just go one step further and ask, were you able to glean from your review as to those permits that were not coded as new construction, what jurisdictions they came from? Was there a breakdown?
You're talking about the two that make up the 13%?
No, I'm referring back to, I think it's the ones that were not coded as new construction.
That ranged a number of jurisdictions. I could look into that and get back to you if that would be okay, because I don't have that readily available right now.
Okay, or it might be easier to say which ones were not.
Again, that I would need to go back and look at. I'll make a note to look at that.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, if I can, I just have two questions on two other findings. If I can just have a little leeway just to ask those two questions.
Sure.
On finding number 5, on the home tax credits, I know we were able to look at, or you were able to pull together that information, but my question is, is that just lost revenue at some point, or are we able to recapture that at all? And that may or may not necessarily be within your bailiwick, but want to find out whether that's the status of that.
Well, those would be credits that the homeowners did not get. So it's money that they in turn did not receive back.
Right.
So I guess to answer your question, it would be, I guess the counties got too much revenue, and some of that should have went to the homeowners.
Exactly. So again, if I just follow my previous question.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. I think
Go ahead.
DAT may be able to answer that a little better, because I believe they're working on compiling information of the number of people that were impacted by this. So maybe some of their work, they've already got an answer on that.
Okay. And the last question I have is just on the repeat findings. This is just a big issue with me, and has been with this committee for probably several years now since I've been on it. On the repeat findings, how many of the repeat findings have a history of repeat findings? So that's just not a repeat finding from the previous audit, but prior years' audits. Are there any within that category? And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. At one point in time, on repeat findings that were reported, there have been some repeat findings that have been the same repeat findings for about 3 audit cycles. So are there any that are beyond just a 1 audit cycle that we're looking at?
That's a very good question. The 3 repeat findings, finding 3 in the report is a repeat finding, and that just goes back 1 audit cycle. Finding 4 is a repeat finding, and I believe that one goes back 2 audit cycles for the audits being done. And then the other repeat finding is an IT finding, and that one goes back 1 cycle. So it's not like there are any that are, sometimes you see them where it's like, this has been repeated in 3 or 4 audits. None of them are like that, it appears.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Delegate Haynes, and we trust that there will be a deeper dive and additional conversations regarding this in your subcommittee in the Public Safety Administration. So thank you, Delegate Haynes, for the questions. The gentleman from Western Maryland is recognized, Delegate Mike McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My chairman and subcommittee, Chairman Haynes, stole my thunder on repeat findings, but that just means he's trained us very well in PSA to be looking out for those types of items. If I may, Adam, I'm not exactly sure who actually worked on the key findings for number 1, and that was about the adequate procedures to ensure all physical inspections of real property were performed. My question is when you were performing that audit and looking at what procedures were or were not there, was there any mention to the ability to use real estate websites to allow those to look into properties that normally you don't have the ability to go inside homes? You can look through the inspections or permits that have been purged for the county for improvements. But did you find anything in there that allowed those to use actual websites to look inside, say, a house being for sale and having a virtual reality of everything inside? Do you know if that's being used by SSTAT or not?
I don't know if they're using it to look inside the homes, but I recall, I believe that at times they would look at like Google Maps and other sort of satellite imagery. They have a number of things that they can look at for outside the home that I know they look at during the assessment process. I don't know I don't believe I'm aware of them like looking at like a real estate website, a virtual tour, walkthrough to see what's inside the house. That may be a better question for them to see if they're using that. I don't recall if they did that though.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll save that for Mr. Higgs. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, Delegate McKay. Are there any questions from the members of the Appropriations Committee for Mr. Westover or any of the other auditors? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Before we have the agency come up from the SSTAT, I'd like to make a quick announcement as part of the continuity of government members of the Appropriations Committee who'll be in and out of this virtual briefing due to receiving vaccinations. So just want to make that announcement that you'll see members come in and out occasionally this afternoon. Moving on to the agency, we have from Department of Assessment and Taxation, we have Mr. Michael Higgs, the director, and Mr. Corbett Webb, who is the associate director. Mr. Higgs and Mr. Webb, you can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair Chang, for the introduction, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, for having us today and allowing us to address the findings from OLA and to take any questions that you may have. When we first got to the agency, SDAT was ranked among the 3 lowest agencies in the state for virtually all customer service metrics and had a host of problems, including audit findings that did go back several audit cycles. We have been working diligently, our team, on correcting these errors and the problems with the agency. And I'm very proud to report that today we are in the top third of virtually every customer service metric that the state tracks. And for an agency with the word taxation in its name, we're especially proud of that. And we also have one of the best digital suites of services available in the state, and those customer service ratings are through the roof. We are especially appreciative of the efforts of OLA to root out problems in the operations of the agency so that we know what needs to be fixed. We have been extremely cooperative since my arrival, and we look forward to their visits and in fact encourage any of our employees that have issues that they come up with to let OLA know and talk about them with them if they don't see the right kind of corrective action being taken in the agency. We take these reports extremely seriously, and it's always our goal to have 0 repeat findings and make sure that we are all ready to go and clean for the next audit cycle. This is the best audit that the agency has had in decades, and I thank OLA for pointing that out. Adam did a wonderful job, and I'm glad to hear that all of my people were extremely cooperative with the auditors. With that, I'm happy to take any specific questions that you guys may have about the audit findings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Higgs, for your presentation. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee? The gentleman from Western Maryland is recognized, Delegate Mike McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Mr. Higgs, it's wonderful that you went to the top third in customer service. So that's excellent. And especially having taxation in your name to be the top third, you know, that's an attaboy that maybe even raised to number 1 if you didn't have taxation in your name. So my question is to you now that it was to Adam. When we are doing the research to determine the policies and procedures of physical inspections, is the department, while I understand using Google Maps and the aerial to look outside, is the department using MLS virtual showrooms where they're showing the inside of homes to do the value of an assessment for of a piece of property?
Our assessments only include exterior physical inspections. So we do not go into the home and inspect the inside of any homes unless we are invited to by the homeowner during an appeal process. And even then, that's extremely rare. On occasion, homeowners will provide us with pictures of the interior of the home for an appeal. But by and large, we go with the average home condition for that neighborhood in determining a guesstimate of what the inside of those homes look like across a wide area. So any tools that are available, we do make use of, but as far as internal sort of walkthrough tools, I highly doubt that our assessors are putting that to much use, like I said, except for very specific appeal situations.
Okay, I understand from an appeal standpoint. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the answering the question, sir.
The gentleman from the City of Baltimore is recognized, Delegate Keith Haynes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Unless forgive me if I missed this, but 2 things. One, do you have a written response that was submitted to the audit findings? and is that included in our packet of information?
We did submit a response to the audit findings, and then we submitted a follow-up response just this past week, or I think it's 2 weeks ago now, to the last OLA hearing that we had.
Okay, and just so I can sort of fast forward to get to where I'm going, can you just tell me whether any or all of the repeat findings, and you may have mentioned this earlier, I just missed it, and I do apologize if it's repetitive. Any or all of the repeat findings have been resolved?
Well, I can tell you on the from the IT side, the one repeat finding that we had there was really more of a misunderstanding in regards to what it was that OLA was looking for in regards to log tracking. Now that we have a more clear understanding of that, that was extremely easy for us to just put it in a routine to start checking the logs in the way that they would like them checked. So that's been completely resolved. What were the other repeat findings? Let me go back here. Had the
I think it was number 3, number 4 as well. 3 with one.
Okay, the finding cycle in regards to the entities that did not submit a personal property return, that is an extremely complicated situation where we have antiquated technology that is blocking the way, both on our side and on the comptroller side. The comptroller is busy with a $100 million plus upgrade to their system to get off of the mainframe and on into a cloud-based modern taxation system. We are also in the midst of a transition on our tax credit side to get off the mainframe, and we have a green screen interface, COBOL programming. I mean, it's extremely antiquated. Once we both have more modern computer systems, it will be much easier to match the data and find out what companies are and are not paying their fair share like they're supposed to. We are working on ways in the meantime to improve the processes, but it is extremely manual, extremely cumbersome. It is not our highest priority in the agency. I'm going to be frank about that. So there are other things that take precedence for the limited manpower that we have, but we are working to come up with a solution and that will make that situation better and allow us to police that a little better. And Mr. Webb can follow up on that if he would like. And then the last one is the homeowner's tax credit. That one is a situation where there was virtually no auditing taking place when I arrived at the agency. We have had to reshuffle an awful lot of personnel and priorities in order to get audits in place. We now have an upfront contemporaneous audit that we're doing of things that come in. And the first time we ran that, we actually had an extremely high percentage of errors. That allowed us to fix some things in our processing methodology so that we are now cut our error rate down from almost 20% to less than 5%. But it is still a paper-heavy manual process of entering data into a green screen that goes into the mainframe before calculations are run. So we are getting better. We have improved greatly from my arrival. It's not where it needs to be. And by the next audit cycle, we are confident that this matter will be resolved and we will be all up to date on all past audits.
Oh, okay. Mr. Chairman, I just want to add a comment. Thank you very much, Mr. Higgs. I know that you've had some issues there with the agency, and we all know that there are manpower issues across our various agencies and just trying to get things done. The question I just have for you, which is, you don't need to answer now, but I'm sure that when we get into budget hearings, it may be helpful to provide to us sort of where the priority is with this particular issue as it relates to the overall priorities of the agency. So if there's something that we need to be helpful with, that we can help you get to where you need to be. We know it's labor intensive, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Delegate Haynes.
Mm-hmm.
Next, The gentlelady who chairs the Joint Audit Committee is recognized, Delegate Carol Cram.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to tell Chairman Haynes that he was correct. There is no testimony, as I recall. There was a response to the audit, but there was no testimony. And is that true, Mr. Westover, Mr. McWilliams, if you're still on the call? As I recall, there wasn't separate testimony from SDAT, but there was a response to the audit.
Yes, you are correct. Like at the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee, there wasn't a separate testimony presented. There was the report response, which their response is an appendix to our report. And then we send a follow-up letter after we analyzed the response. And then DAT sent us a response to that letter. And that was, like Mr. Hicks said, that was about 2 weeks ago. But I believe there's no written testimony provided to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westover, for the response, and thank you, Chairwoman Krim, for additional information on that. Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee regarding the State Department Assessment Taxation? Seeing none, that concludes the audit hearing for the State Department Assessments Taxation. Everybody have a good day. Next, we'll move on to the Maryland Department of Transportation, Motor Vehicle and Administration. Presenting the audit findings, we have Mr. Mark Hagenbuck, CPA Audit Manager. Mr. Hagenbuck, thank you very much for being here, and your presentation is available on the screen. And if you'd like to introduce any staff, please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Mark Hagenbuck, Audit Manager for the Audit of the Motor Vehicle Administration. And with me also on this meeting is Catherine Clark, who served as the Senior Auditor on the assignment and has since been promoted to Audit Manager. Our audit report dated November 23rd, 2020 included 9 findings, only one of which was repeated from the preceding audit report. Page 2 of the presentation contains some background information on the Motor Vehicle Administration, or MVA. Now, as most Marylanders are probably aware, MVA is responsible for activities related to registration and titling of vehicles, as well as issuance of various licensing and identification cards, which we will refer to as products. During fiscal year 2019, MVA collections totaled $1.8 billion, primarily from excise tax and vehicle registration fees. MVA processed approximately 5.9 million licensing transactions, resulting in nearly $49 million in revenue. On page 3, here we go. Okay, great. Page 3 contains a summary of the key findings that I will be going over in more detail in this presentation. The findings are primarily related to MVA's procedures over issuance of products and maintenance of related records. On page 4 of the presentation, we start with the first report finding. Now, to provide a little bit of a background, certain documents are required in order for individuals to obtain products such as licenses. These documents are intended for MVA to properly assess the individual's identity and age, social security number, and residential address. Our report finding number 1 noted that MVA did not always use available data to prevent, identify, investigate, and cancel products, primarily licenses, including real IDs, that were issued based on questionable documentation. As a result, products may have been issued to ineligible individuals. We identified 2 distinct situations impacted by MVA not using all available data. As previously stated, MVA obtains documents from individuals to verify the customer's address. The address noted on the documentation provided by the customer is recorded in the MVA's electronic records, and MVA retains a scanned copy of the paper documentation that was provided. Our analysis of MVA data as of July 2019, as well as records from the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, noted that there were 106 addresses, each with 20 or more individuals, that appeared to be single-family residential dwellings. Now, a picture of one of these addresses is shown in our audit report under this finding. It's a Baltimore City row house that had 26 individuals licensed at this one dwelling. Further, our review of another one of the 106 addresses, which was associated with 30 individuals, with products issued to 30 individuals, noted at least 10 instances of fraudulent documents that were used to support the address. While MVA had certain procedures to identify some questionable addresses, the procedures were not robust. That is, MVA did not perform a periodic system-wide data analysis to determine if similar situations existed. We also found an instance in which MVA, based on their investigation of a fraud hotline tip, determined that 10 people used fraudulent documentation to support their address to obtain a product. However, MVA did not take action to cancel these products until we brought it to their attention over 1 year after the conclusion of their investigation. And for the second part of finding 1 is on page 5 of the presentation. We found 70 social security numbers that were associated with what appeared to be 140 individuals. We provided this data to MVA, who concluded that 12 numbers were each used by 2 different individuals. In other words, duplicate numbers. The remaining 58 numbers were due to duplicate accounts. For example, when a person changes their last name due to marriage, and the MVA sets up a second account that should be consolidated in the records. Now, while MVA may indicate that the number of actual duplicates social security numbers is minimal, we would like to point out that MVA had procedures in place intended to prevent this from occurring, as well as a secondary procedure designed to detect duplicates if the first procedure did not work. As indicated in our report, MVA's procedures were not functioning as intended, as MVA had not previously identified the potential duplicates we noted. On page 6 of our presentation, we start with finding 2. It reads, MVA did not always apply points or suspend or revoke non-commercial licenses as required for serious motor vehicle convictions received in other states. When a driver with a Maryland license receives a serious motor vehicle conviction while driving in a state other than Maryland, the law requires MVA to assess points and suspend or revoke the related license. For example, if a driver gets convicted of driving under the influence in Pennsylvania, MVA is required to assess 12 points and revoke the driver's license. MVA performed this process by first recording the convictions in the related driving records, then assessing the appropriate number of points, and finally taking action to suspend or revoke the license based on the number of points assessed. Our audit disclosed that MVA did not record points for 1,275 out of 2,704 out-of-state convictions. This represented 1,172 people, since some people had more than one conviction. Therefore, no licenses were suspended or revoked as a result of these convictions, since the driving record would not indicate a need for this. Further, we noted when MVA did record points on the driving records, they did not always suspend or revoke the related license. On page 7 of the presentation is the results of our test of 10 out-of-state convictions, with 5 instances where MVA did not record points and 5 instances where they did. However, MVA did not suspend or revoke any of the 10 licenses. One of the 10 drivers was cited for negligent driving in Maryland within 6 months of a Delaware conviction that should have resulted in a revoked license. On page 8, we summarize findings 3, 4, and 5. For findings 3, MVA has system controls in place to prevent individuals from obtaining products. For example, if the individual has an unpaid debt, the system control would lock the account until the debt is paid. For certain of these controls, an MVA employee may obtain documents from the customer that satisfy the necessary conditions and then process the transactions required to issue the product, effectively overriding or unlocking the system control. MVA supervisors are required to review each system override as well as the supporting documentation to make sure the override was proper. Our audit disclosed instances where the supervisors approved overrides without adequate documentation to ensure the overrides were proper. Our test of 20 overrides disclosed 7 lacked sufficient documentation to support that the conditions had been met, including situations where the individuals had convictions in other states that may have disqualified them from obtaining a Maryland license. Further, when supervisors did reject the override, MVA system still issued the license. In these cases, MVA did not make an effort to recover the products. And finding 4 disclosed that MVA did not always notify other states when it issued a Maryland license. This process is necessary so that the other states may cancel the license that they issued in order to prevent individuals from having more than one active license, for which we found instances of this occurring. Finding 5 is related to individuals who at one time were licensed in another state and then subsequently obtained a Maryland license. For example, somebody moving into Maryland from another state. MVA did not always record driving convictions received in the other states prior to issuing the Maryland license. There were over 150,000 non-commercial licenses issued during January 17 through July 19. Our test of 21 of these licenses found that of 7 that had a conviction in another state, MVA did not record the conviction on the driving record for 3 of the 7. On page 9 and 10, we show our information systems findings. Finding 6 notes that personally identifiable information, or PII, was stored in a manner that did not provide adequate safeguards. MVA and the Office of Secretary maintained PII for driving records in a manner that did not provide adequate safeguards. Our audit disclosed 2 databases involving 10.4 and 4.8 million records respectively were maintained in a manner that made the information vulnerable to improper disclosure. In addition, over 1,100 system users had the ability to view PII for approximately 4.8 million licensees. MVA management advises that its current system has limitations. However, its new system, Customer Connect, which is under development, will have the ability to safeguard and restrict access to view PII. And MVA should be able to provide details on the progress of implementation of the new system. On page 10, please. Finding 7 disclosed inadequate procedures for updating malware protection software. Findings 8 and 9 on page 10 are related to contract procurement and monitoring issues. And page 11 rather shows our conclusions and recommendations to MVA to take corrective actions. I'd like to point out that during our audit fieldwork, MVA was very cooperative and receptive to our findings as we discussed them periodically prior to developing our audit report. In particular, the administrator has shown keen interest in quickly correcting the findings that we had brought up to her attention. I am available if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hagenbach, for the presentation. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee to Mr. Hagenbach on the audit findings? Seeing none. We have from the agency, from the Maryland Department of Transportation, we have Gregory Slater, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation, Sean Powell, Deputy Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation, Christy Nizer, Motor Vehicle Administration Administrator, and Nagash Asefa, Motor Vehicle Administration Administrator. Mr. Secretary, when you and your staff are ready, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Chang, members of the committee. For the record, I am Greg Slater, Secretary, Maryland Department of Transportation. We also have Administrator Nizer, members of our MVA team here today. Thank you for inviting us to respond to the Office of Legislative Audits audit report for the Maryland Department of Transportation Motor Vehicle Administration. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I hope everyone is healthy and well. MVA completes about 11 million transactions on an annual basis and continues to play a critical role to help maintain that supply chain and connect Maryland residents to their opportunities. We take responsibility for protecting the personal information of our customers very seriously, and we are constantly evaluating our practices and procedures to ensure that we are not only meeting the security-related standards, but as a practical matter, exceeding those standards. MVA is currently undergoing a major IT modernization, moving from a mainframe-based system to a web-based application that has many integration and multi-level security features that will help us take the security of our systems even further as we fully implement phase 2 of our Customer Connect system later next year. We appreciate the Office of Legislative Audits and their important role that they play in ensuring our processes and procedures are strong and protect Maryland residents. We are aligned in that MVA worked closely with the audit team and in many aspects addressed the issues as soon as they were brought to their attention. Where more work was required, MVA ensured the appropriate resources were dedicated to get that work done to the best of our ability. In addition, MVA has a robust internal auditing plan to ensure that these issues remain in compliance moving forward. I'd like to now turn it over to Administrator Nizer to really walk through the specific findings.
Thank you, Secretary Slater, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Chrissy Neiser. I'm the administrator of the Maryland Department of Transportation Motor Vehicle Administration. I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you today to talk through the audit items. I do want to thank Mark Hagenbach and his entire team, Catherine Clark. They were all great to work with. And as the Secretary said, we continue to have conversations even post-audit just to ensure that we are on the same page and will not have issues moving forward. We remain focused on providing that premier customer service, but safety and security are obviously equal priorities. We recognize that the products that we provide are critical to identity and vehicle ownership, as well as many other critical functions. And that's why we always review our processes and procedures on a regular basis. We do have a fraud working group that meets with our senior leadership on a bi-monthly basis to review issues as they come up, to try to be proactive and not just reactive. And as Secretary Slater mentioned, we are embarking on a new IT system that will address some of the security issues that have been identified by the auditors. We are proud that we implemented phase 1 in July of last year. That was our vehicle system. Our driver system will be implemented in December of 2021. And at that point, we'll have all of our customer-facing systems under the new system, which will have that additional level of security. I just want to talk a little bit about that. It is a multi-layer secure architecture with many integrated security features, and that obviously helps protect that customer data from any potential malicious attacks. Just a few of the features: our communication between various application components is encrypted and occurs at all layers. Enterprise level encryption of data at rest as well as in motion. Application endpoint security. Role-based access control. It logs every transaction and any change. It has a snapshot function which allows you to replay any user's transaction to see exactly what happened. A full audit of all successful and failed logons, and multi-factor authentication. So we're really excited about the full implementation of the system, again, to increase the level of security that we're already dedicated to. We do have very complex operation, as the Secretary indicated, and we're pleased that this is actually the fewest number of findings over the last several audit cycles. That being said, I wouldn't be satisfied until we're down to 0 audit sites, and certainly that is the commitment that we try to meet. I do want to walk through the specific audit items and what we've done since the audit was released to us. In terms of audit finding number 1, M.MBA addressed what we call a bad address database in March of 2017. And these are databases where there's more than 15 individuals that have obtained a license or ID card at that address. That new security feature was successful in stopping 2,491 attempts between the period of 2019 and January of 2021. So we did successfully put that feature in place. However, we were adding addresses to that database only after we fully vetted them. So the investigations team was reviewing them and doing an investigation before they would add them. And as a result, there were some that the auditors identified that were able to get through because we had not added that address to the database. Since the conclusion of the legislative audit, we went back and added all those remaining addresses into the database. And as of November 27th, we put an additional control in place where every night, if an address is 15 or more times in the database, that address is automatically added to the system. So there's no manual intervention required at all. Those addresses are automatically added to the system so that we would prevent that from happening and require additional investigation to occur. There were some issues that were identified, such as not taking timely action on cancellation. Those have all been addressed and resolved when it was brought to our attention. There were also a process in place to identify duplicate Social Security numbers. We are pleased with the fact that there were only 70 potential duplicate Social Security numbers out of our 4.8 million, but again, we want that number to be 0. What we found is that there was a report that was being worked weekly, and unfortunately that report was not comprehensive. So if the agents did not work the report that week, the individuals were not on the report the following week. So that's the way that some of them slipped through the cracks. So we've since corrected that report, so it's now duplicative. It's actually generated daily now instead of weekly, and that again helps us keep up with it on a more routine basis. For finding number 2, again, the action related to driving records is all a manual process right now. That is something we're working on with the new system to see if we can automate some of that functionality, because obviously it is very intensive from a work perspective, but it also is something that is very sensitive in terms of taking action on a driving record. And so we do have supervisor review processes, but when we looked at the 1,275 out-of-state convictions that Office of Legislative Audit indicated action needed to be taken on, there were some that either action had already been taken, or it was actually a conviction that happened when they were in another state and they subsequently moved, and therefore no action was needed. But we did take the action that needed to be taken in every case to ensure those records were updated. And obviously we appreciate the sensitivity, especially from a driver safety standpoint, of making sure those driving records are up to date and accurate. And that's why we've put those additional provisions in place to ensure that we've got supervisory review of that manual process as it takes place. On finding 3, in June of 2020, we revised our policy to include guidance for supervisors if documentation related to overrides is not acceptable. And a memo was issued to all of our branch personnel detailing the appropriate override process. I will say that, again, the new system, Customer Connect, will have that process built in. So you'll be able to follow that override from the beginning to the end to see exactly what happened, and all the documentation will be self-contained within the system. So we're building that into Customer Connect. On finding 4, we took corrective action to ensure the required notifications are made for all non-commercial licenses that were issued to individuals from states that aren't participating in the state-to-state verification service. That's a system where we electronically exchange information when people move from one state to another. Again, with the manual process, things often get lost in the mail or fax system, and so certainly that electronic service is the best way going forward to assure that everything is accurate and up to date. What happened is the automated process was working well, but the staff, not thinking that there were still other states not participating in state to state, we're only about 30 states that are participating in the electronic service, had stopped doing the manual process. We quickly reinstituted it as soon as we found out it had stopped. The good news is more and more states are added each month. We just had one state added this month, another state joining in March. So hopefully in the next few years, we'll have all the jurisdictions who participate in that new service. We took care of making sure every state that had somebody who moved found out that information. We provided them that update. On finding 5, we have a process in place for updating licensees' driving records on a weekly basis as conviction information is received from other states for a violation they might have received while driving in another jurisdiction. Unfortunately, we did have a backlog during the period of time that the auditors were reviewing. That backlog was eliminated as of November 2019, and we are keeping up with it. There is a process for the supervisor to review those records, and we've also added, this is a matrix that we look at our monthly management review with our senior leadership. So again, making sure, knowing the critical nature of keeping those driving records up to date, we are reviewing that to ensure at every level that that is happening appropriately. For finding 6, the protection of our customers' personal information is obviously incredibly serious and something we hold very high. I do want to say that we are in full compliance with the current Information Technology Security Manual and the Federal Information Processing Standards. And that sets out what is acceptable in terms of protecting personal information as well as sensitive information. The approximately 1,100 employees out of over 1,700 who have personal identifiable information access is because it's a required business need. So they're an agent who issues licenses and needs access to that kind of data. M.MBA follows the NIST guidelines, which is the least privilege principle when assigning access. So, you only get access to the very least amount of information that you need. Based on the nature of what we do, though, a large number of our employees do obviously need access to that information. We also review their access on a regular basis to make sure that that access is still needed. They haven't moved to a job that no longer is required of them. The guidance provided in the State of Maryland Information Technology Security Manual regarding de-identification of PII or other sensitive information applies when controlled disclosure is authorized outside the system boundary, not within. There's no provision or requirement that sensitive data be marked or truncated when in process within the internal security boundary. Unfortunately, with our old system, we are a mainframe COBOL system, as the Appropriation Committee knows well, but we're going through that IT modernization to get a more secure system, a more updated system. We are going to put those additional security measures in place with the new system. It's just right now, it really is cost prohibitive to be able to put those into the older system. I will say that we've, in talking with the legislative auditors, we have put some measures in place in the interim to look at the number of transactions performed by agents and to see if there is a higher than normal number of transactions, and in those cases to take a further look at what's going on there. And so that's an interim measure that we've put in place, trying to ensure, again, we're protecting information to the greatest extent possible. For finding 7, this is one that we've had a lot of back and forth with the Office of Legislative Auditors about. Again, we've always been on current and supported malware protection, and we do adhere to DOIT's Information Technology Security Manual. There's no specific timeline requirement specified in that. Only the agencies be on supported software, and information systems should be automatically updated, which we are. Both of those things that we do, we actually automatically update security definitions on a daily basis. And as malware is developed, that file is updated to include the signature so that it is recognized and prevents infection. DOIT's guideline is that the version of malware should be currently supported and no more than 2 versions behind the most currently available software. Our goal is always to have the most recent version of anti-malware software in order to provide that most up-to-date protection. We actually had a recent conversation with OLA as recently as last week about this very issue. And essentially the guidance they provided is that if MDOT/MBA is unable to meet that goal of having the most up to date, then we'll document why. So if there's significant operational issues that prevent us from implementing it, we'll make sure we have that documentation and then provide it to the auditors. While fully supported versions of anti-malware software cover our workstations, I want to point out that that's only one of several protections that we have in place. Most of the malware attacks directed towards us are actually caught at the perimeter by intrusion detection or intrusion prevention systems before they reach our servers or workstations. And as a result, I do want to again confirm that our computers have been and continue to be fully protected. For finding 8, this was related to our IT contracts and requiring more detailing billing reports. We have provided additional training to our staff in terms of contract management. There is a 40-hour contract management class that the department has actually created to ensure that anybody who is monitoring a project is taking all the appropriate action and documenting the detail that needs to be in place. We've had nearly 20 MDOT/MBA employees take that class, and there's some additional employees that are scheduled to take it soon. We are actively working on that. We know it's important that we are managing contracts and documenting everything as appropriate. Finding 5, and this is the only repeat audit, and I share some of the sentiments that were already communicated by the committee members. I hate repeat audit sites. It is something that I am very passionate about not having. I will say on this one, there was a misunderstanding by our procurement team about purchase order requests for proposal. They didn't think that secondary competition and password protection were necessary for those. They thought it was just for RFPs, not for PORFs. And so we had implemented last time those provisions that were required related to the RFPs. We now very clearly understand it also needs to be done for the PORFs. This was actually implemented. We adopted new procedures, which we shared with the auditors, and that was implemented back in May of 2020. So, making sure those bids are submitted in a password protected way and making sure we're taking the appropriate steps and having that sealed bid open in the presence of 2 employees and documented so that will not be an issue going forward. Again, I want to thank the legislative auditors. I always look at it that these are opportunities for us to get better and to enhance our processes. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions the committee members may have.
Thank you very much, Administrator Nizer, for the presentation. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for the Maryland Department of Transportation? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. That concludes the briefing for the Maryland Department of Motor Vehicles audit findings. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to the Maryland Department of Health Pharmacy Services. We have Mr. Joshua Adler, who is the Audit Manager and Assistant Audit Director, presenting the audit findings. Mr. Adler, whenever you're ready to proceed, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Josh Adler. I'm the Assistant Director with the Office of Legislative Audits. I'm here today virtually with Adam Arabak, who is Audit Senior on this assignment. We audited the Maryland Department of Health Pharmacy Services, which I'll refer to as MDH Pharmacy Services. Before I begin, I would like to sincerely thank the department, MDH, for all their help during the audit. It was extremely important to us that we work cooperatively, and I think it went very, very well. As noted on slide 2, historically, our office has audited MDH's pharmacy services in 2 different audits: in the audit of the Medical Care Program Administration and in the audit of the Prevention and Health Promotion Administration. To promote consistency in reporting of audit issues, we modified our audit approach this time around and consolidated our review of MDH pharmacy services into one audit. Now, there are many details to this audit, and I'm going to try to be very clear, but however, if you have any questions during my presentation or afterwards, please do not hesitate to ask. As noted on slide 3, from the 30,000-foot view of MDH's pharmacy services, you could really group the services into 2 buckets. There is the pharmacy services provided under Medicaid Managed Care Program, and then there are the pharmacy services provided under the 4 other programs within the health department, which are the Maryland Medicaid Pharmacy Program, Kidney Disease Program, Maryland AIDS Drug Assistance Program, and the Breast and Cervical Cancer Diagnosis and Treatment Program. So there are 2 buckets. There's the Medicaid Managed Care Program and everything else. In our audit report, comments regarding an independent audit and finding 1 relate to the Medicaid Managed Care Program, bucket 1, and findings 2 through 7 relate to all the other programs. Now I'm going to briefly describe the distinguishing characteristics of the Medicaid Managed Care Program as well as those of the other 4 programs as kind of a primer for how pharmacy services work at MDH. Beginning with the Medicaid Managed Care Program. Under this program, the state contracted with 9 private managed care organizations and pays them a monthly capitation payment for each recipient enrolled in the MCO. Capitation payment means that MDH's immediate financial risk is limited to the amount that we pay the MCOs, because whether the individual needs more or less services, MDH only pays the capitation amount. Now, the MCOs in turn contracted with 1 of 5 pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, to run the pharmacy program for the MCOs, which includes making payments to pharmacies that they improve. During calendar year 2019, the capitation payment costs related to pharmacy services totaled approximately $729 million. Now, the 4 other pharmacy programs is distinctly different from the first program in 2 areas. First of all, under these programs, services are provided through a fee-for-service model. Through this model, payments are made directly to pharmacies by MDH after claims have been adjudicated through a point-of-sale system. Second of all, these pharmacy programs are administered by MDH's pharmacy vendor with oversight from MDH. During fiscal year 2019, MDH's payments to pharmacies for these services totaled approximately $709 million. As noted on page 4 of our handout, circling back to the pharmacy services provided through the Medicaid Managed Care Program, numerous concerns were raised by the Maryland General Assembly, by pharmacies. These concerns focused on the payments of the pharmacy benefit managers, or the PBMs, made to the pharmacies. During 2019 General Assembly session, a law was passed which required MDH to hire an independent firm to audit all the MCO's PBMs. Now, the primary purpose of this audit was to review contractual relationships between the MCOs, the PBMs, and the pharmacies, and to analyze the claims data to evaluate reimbursements to the pharmacies and report the information gathered to MDH. Before I get into what happened, what the independent audit found, I need to give you a little background. Now, there are two ways that the PBMs could get paid from the MCOs. The first way is referred to as the pass-through method, under which the MCO pays the PBM for actual payments made by the PBM to pharmacies for dispensing drugs, plus an admin fee. So if the MCO pays the PBM $5 for a particular medicine, then that would be the amount that the PBM would pay the pharmacy. The PBM will make its money solely from an administrative fee, which the MCO would pay to the PBM. In contrast, the second method is called spread pricing. Now, under this methodology, the MCO pays a negotiated rate to the PBM, which often differs from the PBM's negotiated rate with the pharmacies. The difference between the amounts paid by the MCOs to the PBMs and the amounts the PBMs paid to the pharmacies is retained by the PBMs and referred to as the spread. So under this methodology, the MCO makes a deal with the PBM to pay them, say, $15 for a particular drug. Then the MCO makes a deal, then the PBM makes a deal with the pharmacies that they're going to pay them $5 for a particular drug. Under this scenario, the PBM makes its money from the difference in the amount that it got paid from the MCO, the $15, and the amount that it paid the pharmacies, the $5. So in this scenario, they'd make they'd make $10 off of this. Neither methodology guarantees better pricing for the program. But the really big deal is that the pass-through method provides for much more transparency and visibility into the financial and operational practices, and allows for better monitoring and accountability. That is, it's out in the open as to how much money the PBM is making. Conversely, the spread pricing methodology is generally ambiguous and lacks transparency into the amount of the spread and actual payments being made between parties, since much of the financial activity is deemed to be proprietary by the PBMs and is often not disclosed. Now, the independent audit found that all the MCOs use spread pricing as part of the compensation package with the PBMs. And in calendar year 2018, spread, which again is the difference between what the MCOs paid the PBMs and what the PBMs paid the pharmacies, was $72 million. Now, the independent audit also found that the PBMs had a greater spread for pharmacies not associated with the PBM. And the PBMs often imposed various fees and adjustments to the pharmacies, which had the potential of increasing the spread. However, the independent audit did not calculate the impact of the fees and adjustments because they were complex and they had an audit deadline. Lastly, the independent audit determined that the average amount paid by the PBMs to the pharmacies to fill prescriptions was 50 cents, while the health departments for the 4 other programs paid the pharmacies $10.49 for filling the prescriptions. We now proceed to finding 6, to finding 1, which is on slide 6. This finding discussed similar issues to those mentioned by the independent audit. We know that MDH did not establish financial and reporting requirements and didn't monitor pharmacy services provided through the MCOs. For example, we noted that MDH's agreements with the MCOs didn't address whether the MCO's contracts with the PBMs should use the pass-through or the spread pricing methodology. It didn't address the types of adjustments that could be made, and it didn't address dispensing fees. As a result, we noted that MDH had no knowledge over how the MCOs were operating in these areas. In response to the independent audit, MDH modified its calendar year 2020 agreements with the MCOs to prohibit spread pricing. In addition, we were advised that it's working on the issues related to adjustments in dispensing fees. We also noted that in this finding that MDH did not have procedures to monitor the MCOs to ensure that the administration of the pharmacy services and operational controls was adequate. Now, this is a very big deal because MDH did not know that only appropriate claims were processed. Sensitive information was properly safeguarded by the MCO and PBM, And it didn't know whether programs are compliant with state regulations, like requirements regarding which drugs are covered or not covered. Now, we were advised by MDH management that they didn't provide oversight of the claims activity because the Medicaid managed care program is based on the capitation payments and not actual claims activity. And therefore, MDH is limited risk. For example, if the MCO improperly paid a claim twice, MDH doesn't actually pay that duplicate claim because their liability is limited to how much the capitation payment was. Although this process does limit their liability, there are other considerations with both financial related and operational impacts. For example, the MCO expenditures, such as claim payments, impact the calculation of future capitation payments, and poor MCO practices may result in a higher rate. Before I discuss finding 2 and the rest of the findings, I'd like to highlight that I'm segueing from the independent audit in finding 1, which is all about the first bucket, the Medicaid managed care program, in which the primary players were the health department, MDH, the MCOs, the pharmacy benefit managers, and the pharmacies. Now for findings 2 through 7, we're going to be discussing the 4 fee-for-service Medicaid programs in which the players are different. They're MDH, MDH's pharmacy vendor, and the pharmacies. Proceeding to page 7, which references finding 2 of our audit report. MDH did not perform audits of pharmacy claims in 3 of the 4 service programs. And now the reason why these audits are so important is to perform manual verifications that are not possible through the pharmacy vendor system. For example, these audits could identify if a pharmacist is billing the state for medicine that was never ordered by a doctor or were never picked up by a patient. We also know that MDH did not evaluate claims to identify pharmacies that may not be processing claim reversals when prescriptions aren't picked up by a recipient. Now, the way the program works is that pharmacies submit claims for reimbursement when the prescriptions are filled, not when they're picked up, but when they're filled. State regulations and common sense would say, okay, let's say the person never picks up the medicine, then the pharmacy should reverse the charges. Now, our review of approximately 1,300 pharmacies with claims totaling $338 million disclosed that 59 pharmacies with $17 million in claims had less than 3% of their claims reversed. Now, this is a red flag for fraud because 3% was a lot less than the program average of 15% for the same time period. So our concern is that pharmacies may be billing Medicaid for pharmaceuticals that were not picked up and not processing reversals. Proceeding to page 8, which references finding 3 of our handout, we noted that the 3 of the programs didn't have procedures to ensure that pharmacy vendors obtained the required documentation authorized high-risk and high-cost pharmacy claims. In fiscal year 2019, the pharmacy vendor processed approximately 45,000 authorization claims for high-risk and high-cost pharmaceuticals totaling $16.7 million. Proceeding to findings 5 and 6, which begin on page 10 of our handout, which references background information. This is all about rebates, and it references background information regarding MDH receives prescription drug rebates under 2 federal programs, which establish the specific drugs that are eligible for rebates and the applicable rebate rates. Now, rebates are received from drug manufacturers for covered outpatient drugs dispensed to approved clients under each program that provides pharmacy services. Now, drug manufacturers are responsible for paying a rebate on drugs for which a payment was made by MDH, regardless of whether MDH's payment was in full or was only a partial payment because, say, an insurance company paid for the other part. Interestingly, for the Maryland AIDS Drug Assistance Program, this has resulted in MDH receiving more money in rebates than is spent on the drugs and is a moneymaker for them. Now, our review of the rebates found very significant issues of the Maryland AIDS Drug Assistance Program. Specifically, on page 11 of our handout, we noted the MDH did not submit certain drug utilization records to 2 drug manufacturers timely. Now, for one of the drug manufacturers, we identified that MDH had not submitted the records, and we therefore asked them to do so. Now, the great news is that once MDH did that at our request, it collected $19.5 million. Now, the bad news is, since they did it so late, it didn't receive rebates, which it could have, and they lost out on $175,000 in lost interest. Now, relating to the other drug manufacturer, MDH was following up on a finding from a previous audit. MDH identified that it had submitted drug utilization records. For this other drug manufacturer, the good news is that once MDH did submit it, it got $1.1 million. Now, the bad news is that since MDH submitted the record so late, it lost out on $1.6 million. Proceeding to page 12, which references finding 6 of our audit report. We noted that MDH did not make sure that drug manufacturers sent timely and proper rebates. As a result, MDH did not pursue collection of $7.3 million in outstanding rebates. Now, this occurred because while MDH regularly received rebates from drug manufacturers and it had the information to determine how much the rebate should be, it never established accounts receivable records to track the rebates. In a nutshell, MDH's position was that whatever rebates were sent to MDH was great, and it didn't work on identifying the rebate, whether the rebate amounts that were sent were timely or correct. Based on MDH's records, as of November 2019, we estimated that 85 drug manufacturers owed MDH $7.3 million in rebates, including $1.5 million that was over a year old. Finally, proceeding to finding 7, which is on page 13 of our handout, we know that MDH did not obtain adequate assurance that its pharmacy vendor had sufficient security over its information system to protect sensitive health data, such as personally identifiable information. According to agency records, during fiscal year 2019, the pharmacy vendor system contained information pertaining to at least 559,000 program enrollees. This concludes our presentation of the Maryland Department of Health's Pharmacy Services. Thank you so very much for your interest, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adler, for the presentation on the audit findings. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for Mr. Adler regarding the Maryland Department of Health Pharmacy Services? Seeing none, thank you very much. Mr. Fred Doggett, who is the Inspector General of the Maryland Department of Health. Mr. Doggett, whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I'm just going to make some brief introductory remarks, and then I'm available to take any questions. And I think Tricia Roddy, Director of Medicaid, will do the same. You may recall that the job of the Office of the Inspector General with regard to OLA audits is, once the department has determined that most of the actions, corrective actions, are complete, then it's our job to go out and test to make sure that new policies are in place, if that's what's been promised, contracts have been let, if that's what's been promised, and to test transactions to make sure things are the way the department reports them to be. So we will be scheduling that, the follow-ups for this audit, as well as the next one that OLA discusses, as soon as we possibly can in this new year. I did want to just briefly address, just for a moment, finding number 2, which discusses the need for a more comprehensive approach to pharmacy audits. And we certainly concur with that, as I know that the Medicaid program does as well. Ultimately, we agree with the Medicaid program that the best way to get at that is via contract with a vendor who has expertise and the bandwidth for that type of audit. And I know that's underway. In the interim, the OIG has recently hired 2 new pharmacists who are outstanding young folks and well-versed in pharmacy, well-versed in data analytics, and they are working with the Medicaid program right now to develop sort of an interim risk-based program targeting the highest risks areas, obviously, that we may be able to help the program get at in the interim until they're able to successfully procure a vendor for that purpose. With that, as I said, I'm available for any questions, but I'll turn it over to Tricia Roddy.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Fred. I'm Trisha Roddy. I'm the Assistant Medicaid Director. And I think what I'll highlight for you all, rather than going through each of the findings, overall, we agreed with the auditors, and we've been implementing most, if not all, of the recommendations. So what I will say is the pharmacy benefit managers, the findings around our MCO contracts with what are called PBMs. As you all know, making PBMs more transparent in their pricing methodology has been a significant priority for the Maryland Medicaid program. We conducted the audit on their spread pricing methodology back in using 2018 data. We required the MCOs in their calendar year 2020 contract to renegotiate their PBM contracts. So they were not allowed to have a PBM pricing methodology starting calendar year 2021. So all 9 MCOs have discontinued spread pricing. And again, they're prohibited from going forward with spread pricing. We've also required our MCOs to conduct audits of their pharmacy benefit managers, and of course, we'll get copies of those audits. Included in their contract as well is a bunch of reporting requirements. So we can continue to get at how they're spending money based on dispensing fees, on ingredient costs, et cetera. So we're going to continue to get that level of detail from our MCOs. And I think the last thing I'll highlight is, we don't regulate our MCOs about what their payment rates should be. However, we do require them in the contract to basically continue both the ingredient cost as well as dispensing fee. And again, through the reports, we'll be able to monitor those activities. But again, it's been a huge priority of ours to get at the PBMs and their contracting pricing methodologies. And our goal overall is to produce more transparent pricing between the MCOs, PBMs, and the pharmacists. So again, I'm happy to answer questions. I know we have Donna Google as well, Fred, from the public health program. I don't know if she has some additional opening statements before we're all available for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duguid, and also Ms. Roddy for the presentation, and also Ms. Google for being here. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for the Maryland Department of Health? Seeing none, thank you very much. This includes the briefing for the audit hearing for the Maryland Department of Health Pharmacy Services. Next, we'll move on to the Maryland Department of Health Medicaid error rate performance audit. We have with us today Matthew Street, who's a CPA CFE audit manager, assistant audit director, providing us a presentation on the audit findings for that program. Mr. Street, whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Matt Street, Assistant Director, and with me today is David Fonstock, who was the Senior Auditor on the Medicaid Performance Audit, and he now heads up our Data Analytics Unit team. This team is responsible for leveraging technology to create innovative solutions that support our office's auditing efforts. I'll make some brief comments and then turn it over to David, who will walk you through the detailed findings. Our office initiated this performance audit to determine if Maryland Department of Health, MDH, had a comprehensive approach in place to identify and analyze improper Medicaid-related payments. This audit had 2 primary objectives. The first objective was to assess if MDH had a comprehensive risk-based approach, including the application of industry-based best practices to monitor Medicaid payments for propriety. The second objective was to determine if MDH was adequately identifying and addressing potential improper Medicaid-related payments. And basically, we found that although MDH had certain processes and controls in place, significant enhancements was both possible and necessary. We developed 9 findings that highlighted in detail what should be improved, and in many cases identified significant examples to demonstrate the importance of these improvements. For example, we concluded that MDH's data analytics were not robust, were not tied to a risk-based approach, and did not fully use managed care encounter data, the MCO encounter data. We also found numerous areas where claims were paid without validation to ensure that the providers were properly enrolled and qualify for Medicaid, as required by federal and state regulations. Furthermore, we identified approximately 9.6 million of potential improper payments over 3 years paid to incarcerated individuals who should have received health care through the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services medical contracts. With that, I will now turn it over to David to present the details of our findings.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is David Fonestock, and I'm pleased to present the findings contained in our performance audit to assess the Department of Health's efforts to identify and analyze improper Medicaid payments. On page 2, slide 2, this slide details the 2 objectives of our audit, as Matt just explained. Our audit included obtaining and analyzing Medicaid payment data for the period from July 2015 through June 2018. The data included both fee-for-service claims and managed care organization data known as encounter data. Slide 3. This slide provides a definition of improper payments as defined by the federal government. MDH's Office of the Inspector General's Division of Program Integrity is a key component to identify and analyze improper Medicaid payments. The division performs various analytics on Medicaid data, which are performed primarily on an ad hoc basis or to follow up on investigations. As of June 30th, 2018, the Office of the Inspector General had 64 employees, including 37 employees assigned to the Division of Program Integrity. It should be noted that Maryland Medicaid payment error rate related to fee-for-service claims was almost half the national average, which was approximately 13%. This is according to a 2017 review performed by Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. So MDH's efforts to ensure Medicaid payments are proper have been effective compared to the national average, but there is room for improvement. According to the CMS review, Maryland's estimated improper payments fee-for-service claims totaled $382 million. Next slide. This slide is a simple picture of Medicaid expenditures compared to other state expenditures. Medicaid is a substantial component of the state's expenditures, with approximately 27% of the state's $41 billion in expenditures. Additionally, it was estimated that Medicaid expenditures are to grow 5.5% per year up to 2027. Next slide. This slide identifies the key findings detailed in our audit. MDH's responses generally reflected overall agreement with our findings and recommendations. I will now describe these findings in greater detail. Slide 6. Finding 1 of our report detailed MDH's Division of Program Integrity did not have a comprehensive process to identify and analyze improper Medicaid payments, and it did not incorporate certain best practices. First, MDH's process lacked capabilities to cross-match between different data sets, such as between MDH's systems and external data sets like workers' compensation claims that should not be paid by Medicaid. And it did not include geomapping and other data visualization techniques to proactively highlight trends, risk patterns, and irregularities in payment activity that could warrant further investigation. Second, MDH's processes were not tied to a risk-based approach or annual plan. Third, MDH's processes did not include performing comprehensive analytics of MCO encounter data. Based on the deficiencies we noted with the Division of Program Integrity's data analytics, we performed our own advanced data analytics using available commercial software. We extracted 3 years of detailed claims data, which was approximately 290 million records from the Medicaid Management Information System known as MMIS. Without going into a lot of detail to explain our process, the extracted data was imported into a product called SQL Server and indexed in a way that we could easily slice and dice information to highlight transactions by provider, claimant, amount, procedure code, and various other metrics. We refer to this analytics tool as the cube. With the cube, queries of the data took a matter of seconds to run, and we could highlight trends or irregularities that warranted further review. In a nutshell, the cube allowed us to perform multi-level queries and visualize claims data through a user-friendly dashboard. For example, for 3 years of pharmacy claims, which were millions of records, we could easily visualize data on prescribers of opioids based on who received the prescription and which pharmacy filled the prescription. We could also easily change any parameters within the data to get different query results within those same data sets. Excuse me. Slide 7. Finding 1 went on to detail that the Division of Program Integrity did not leverage available data matching resources provided through the United States Treasury's Do Not Pay Center. The Do Not Pay Center is a free, robust analytical tool and service that helps states identify and prevent improper payments by matching data to various federal databases, some of which are only available through the federal government. Furthermore, Maryland was one of 7 states that could not identify any steps taken to quantify improvements in the outcomes or effectiveness of its program integrity efforts. Such steps should include conducting a formal annual risk assessment and tracking the measurable and quantifiable benefits of its systems. Without these steps, MDH lacked assurance that its limited resources were used effectively to identify and analyze improper Medicaid payments. Slide 8. Findings 2 and 3 of our report disclose that MDH did not ensure prescribing physicians, referring providers, and certain rendering providers were enrolled in Medicaid prior to approving the claims. As a result, there was a lack of assurance as to whether the services were performed by properly qualified medical practitioners to reduce fraud and lower risk to consumers. Specifically, we know that MDH approved 1.6 million claims totaling approximately $175 million that were submitted by prescribing physicians and referring providers whose enrollment in Medicaid was not validated. MDH allowed the claims to be processed in their system with a general number known in the system as a dummy number. Consequently, identifying provider information on the claims was not provided to the Division of Program Integrity, which prevented the division from performing effective data analysis of claim activity and to identify improper payments. Slide 9. Additionally, we noted that MDH approved 835,000 claims totaling approximately $45 million in which certain rendering providers, such as physical, occupational, and speech therapists, were not identified. Claim amounts related to these therapy group practices increased by 89% from fiscal year 2016 to 2018. Slide 10. In finding 4, we determined that MDH accepted encounter data from MCOs that excluded necessary data elements such as paid denied status, claim amount, and rendering provider information. Not having this information significantly hindered MDH's ability to perform effective oversight and identify and analyze improper claim activity. Since this information was excluded, MDH required assistance from each MCO to manually research and obtain information for each claim it investigated. If MDH had these data elements, it could have developed data analysis tools and techniques to proactively identify questionable patterns or trends with MCO claims. For example, MDH could not perform targeted analysis on material paid claims by certain providers. Instead, MDH had to rely on the MCO to manually provide this information when it made specific inquiries. Slide 11. For finding 5, we determined that MDH did not perform a data match or have an alternate method to determine if MCOs were paying claims for certain services that MDH had carved out from MCO contracts, such as behavioral health, dental, and HIV treatments. Instead, these services were covered directly by MDH's fee-for-service claims. Based on a risk analysis we developed, we performed a data match of fee-for-service behavioral health claims with encounter data reported by the MCOs. This match disclosed approximately 1.1 million potential duplicate claims totaling 65.4 million based on a claim having the same date of service, recipient, diagnosis, provider, and claim charge as the MCO reported encounter data. That is, these could be indicative that such claims could potentially be paid by both MDH as a fee-for-service claim and by the MCOs. Slide 12. For finding 6, we determined MCO providers were not enrolled as Medicaid providers as required by federal regulations. In November 2017, MDH estimated that there were approximately 10,000 MCO providers rendering services to Maryland Medicaid recipients whose enrollment needed to be verified. As of February 2019, the MCOs self-reported that at least 75% of these providers had been enrolled in Medicaid. Slide 13. For finding 7, MDH did not ensure each MCO conducted required investigations of encounter claims activity to ensure payments to providers were proper. The number of investigations conducted by the MCOs was extremely low, as quoted, relative to the size of Maryland Medicaid's managed program. Specifically, the 9 MCOs reported that investigations were conducted on at least 409 providers during fiscal year 2018. One of those MCOs, with $1.5 billion in payments and almost 300,000 enrollees, investigated just 84 providers, and 2 MCOs did not report sufficient details on their investigations. Slide 14. For finding 8, we determined that MDH used incomplete data to identify incarcerated individuals in state correctional facilities who were improperly enrolled in MCOs. Furthermore, MDH's data analytics did not include certain data needed to identify and prevent improper fee-for-service payments for incarcerated individuals. MDH management advised us that it routinely received incomplete data from the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, and that although it had previously made attempts to improve the reliability of the data, it had been unable to fully resolve the issues with DPSCS. We performed our own data match using records directly obtained from DPSCS, which identified 9.6 million in potential improper Medicaid payments related to more than 3,000 individuals who were incarcerated on the dates the medical services were provided or the period for which capitation was paid. I will make note that 7.9 million of the 9.6 million related to monthly capitation payments while these individuals were incarcerated. In effect, this means the state was paying twice for medical care coverage of these inmates who are under DPS's inmate healthcare contracts while incarcerated. These were not caught by MDH's processes due to their process using incomplete incarceration data. Slide 15. For finding 9, we determined that system edits were not properly implemented to prevent payments to providers who were suspended due to a credible allegation of fraud against the providers. Additionally, system edits were not designed to detect certain duplicate payments and overpayments for claims submitted by 2 different providers for the same service and for claims involving both Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements, which are known as Medicare crossover claims. Finally, slide 16. This final slide lists the key recommendations to the audit findings. With that, I want to thank MDH for their cooperation throughout the audit and their willingness and receptiveness to address these audit issues. We've had a very productive relationship both during and after the audit with MDH, including Fred Doggett and his OIG staff. This concludes our presentation. Both Matt Street and I would be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Street and Mr. Fonstock, for the audit's presentation. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for the auditors? Gentlelady from Anne Arundel County, Delegate Shanika Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the detailed report. I wanted to know, you mentioned that when you did the simulator using the technology that you called the Cube, do you believe that if we had that technology implemented that it would capture most of the inconsistencies, or is it a matter of policy as well? Or where are we missing the mark there?
Yeah, it's a twofold issue. I mean, the technology exists that MDH could take advantage of to really analyze a vast majority of their transactions on a very user-friendly dashboards and so forth. The other side of it is having personnel to interpret those results and then pursue certain leads or trends in the data and to determine if you got to investigate those transactions to determine if they are proper or improper and take appropriate action afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome, Delegate Henson. Are there any other questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for the auditors? Seeing none, thank you very much, gentlemen, for the presentation. For the response, we'll hear from Mr. Fred Doggett, Inspector General, Maryland Department of Health. Mr. Doggett, please proceed when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, again. And I want to reiterate what Matt said, and I should have said it for the last audit as well. We have a terrific working relationship with OLA. We find their audits very helpful to us. And in this one in particular, OLA was in the field, started in the field at about the same time that I took over as IG in 2018. So our early conversations with them on these issues really gave us a head start in laying out a roadmap. And Delegate, I wanted to go back to your specific question that you just asked of OLA. It's a great question. And I think there's at least 3 aspects to this. One is people, obviously. one is process, and the other is technology. So we were weak on all three. And again, we've laid out a roadmap. We are well on the way. We began by hiring a new, shortly after I took over, we hired a new director of program integrity. I mentioned to you the terrific pharmacists we have on staff. We brought them on. We have others that we've hired that have an aptitude and some experience with data analytics. So that's been incredibly helpful. But we absolutely lacked process. In particular, I come from an audit background, not an IT background, but an audit background, and we always do risk assessments. No matter what the topic is, no matter what the end game is, we never have enough resources to do all we have to do. Therefore, we need to do risk assessments. So we have developed a risk assessment for our data analytics approach. We're going to roll that out in March. And this is going to be year one for saying, okay, well, here are all the inputs. Here's what we've learned from the inputs, or where the inputs are leading us. Therefore, this is the kind of audit plan we're going to develop based on those inputs. And then we're laying down a marker, obviously, for how well we do against that plan and our results. So that's a key part. Another process part is when I came on board there in 2018, there hadn't been an annual report of accomplishments since 2006 or 07, something like that. So we've worked very hard this last year to put an annual report in place. That's available, by the way. It's on our website, and I think some of you may already have it. But again, laying down the sort of the marker for, okay, well, this is how we did, good or bad, in fiscal year 2020. That gives us something to shoot at in the years to come. We have an RFP in place. It's been the most painful process I've ever been through. It was in place. It began before I took over. It's still making its way through the Board of Public Works and other hurdles, but we're gonna get there. What it does, it will modernize our automated system that you mentioned earlier in one of your questions. So we can do already, as Matt and Dave pointed out, we can do some of this already, but it would be great to have some enhanced tools. So we're working toward that as well. Should also say that Matt and Dave, I won't say they came over. We wanted them to come over, but because of COVID, they gave us a virtual presentation on the details of what they did for this audit. That also was incredibly helpful. Those are the big picture items that we're working on with regard to finding one. I'll mention finding 7 briefly. We have, it's another weakness of ours that I was aware of when I took over, is our ability to get at, number one, MCO data, and number two, what the MCOs are doing with regard to their own audits and their own reporting, which was when I first saw the numbers that the MCOs were reporting in terms of the fraud that they had uncovered. Those were quite literally unbelievable numbers. They were almost non-existent. So we've gotten at that. We have a new dashboard. We have a new staff person who's responsible for coordination with the MCOs. We have now a much enhanced reporting system with them as to what they're doing with regard to fraud, and a better relationship back and forth as to how we can capitalize on each other's work. So I'll stop there. Again, this was a terrific audit, and it was incredibly helpful to us. So we appreciate OLA's good work. And I should say, Tricia may have comments on the rest of the report. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Fred and other members. I'll just quickly say, we agreed with the other findings. We're moving forward with implementation. Let me just touch base on sort of a high level in terms of the key themes. Encounter data. We are now collecting paid and denied information on our encounter data from the MCOs, so we'll be able to do more rigorous analysis around that information. Secondly, the question was, are our MCOs providing services that should be carved out? Are they providing those services to enrollees? And in essence, we're building those costs in our capitation rates and paying for them twice, once on a fee-for-service side as well as through the MCOs. We have agreed that we will do some audits of services that should be cleanly carved out of the MCOs, for example, behavioral health and dental services, to see if that in fact could be happening with the MCOs. Secondly, there was lots of findings around whether or not we are, we've got the prescriber or enrollment edits in place. So just real quickly, there are federal requirements that we should not be paying providers or prescribers who are not enrolled properly in our system. That means that individual prescribers and providers need to be enrolled. We can no longer pay sort of a group provider number, et cetera. We've implemented all edits for all providers except one key group. We're still working on the prescriber edits. And, you know, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we need to be careful of how we turn on these edits, because it'll affect access to care for individuals as well as prescribers' reimbursement. So we are taking this very carefully. During this time, we are working with MedChi right now to do outreach to prescribers to make sure and to use their connection with prescribers to encourage prescribers to get enrolled before we turn on the edits. We're also talking through doing a soft launch, which means we won't actually deny claims right away, and we'll have a period of 2 to 3 months before the hard edits go in. But again, the balancing acts obviously is putting those types of hard edits into a system during a pandemic that again, we're balancing right now. The other item that I'll touch upon is around the incarcerated individuals. So again, this is a balancing act. We don't want to automatically disenroll people who should actually be on the Medicaid program and receive services. So what we're doing is we're getting the data files and we're manually working those files to make sure that the individuals truly are incarcerated and that they will receive services through the prison system, and that they shouldn't be eligible for Medicaid. But again, that's a balancing act. We don't want to automatically disenroll people who actually should be enrolled. And so we are carefully looking at the data rather than doing an automated disenrollment process. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the members have, as well as Fred.
Thank you very much, Inspector General Doggett, and also Ms. Roddy for the response from the Maryland Department of Health. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for the Maryland Department of Health? Seeing none, thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. On behalf of the Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Maggie McIntosh, we want to thank everyone for being on this virtual briefing today, especially to the Office of Legislative Audits and to all the agency members who are here today. And for the Appropriations Committee, the next full committee meeting will be tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. And thank you to the Appropriations Committee staff for helping us today with this virtual briefing. Are there any other announcements from members of the Appropriations Committee at this time? Seeing none, thank you very much. Everybody have a great day.
You too. Thank you.